Hi, it's Malicki from AIM Overseas and the Global Society, and this video comes to you from LAX International Airport. I'm jetting out of here in just a few hours time, and I get to send you this introductory video from here. And I think that's kind of cool because there are literally thousands of Australian university students that pass through this airport every year, and today's topic is an absolutely critical one. You know, I'm passionate about overseas study and enhancing lives through study and travel, because life's a daring adventure or it's nothing at all. But what good is it to have a mission like that if you can't do your very best to make sure the students that pass through places like this are as well prepared as they can be, and their health and safety are some of our foremost considerations. But for now, let me give you a little bit of a summary of the best practice project that I undertook in 2016 on health and safety and risk in Australian outbound student mobility. There's some great outcomes. Okay, so let's talk about the main gaps in terms of health, safety and risk for Australian outbound students. And number one is a massive one. It's travel insurance. You guys know this really, really well. And there are a few key problems when it comes to travel insurance. The first one is leisure travel. Whilst 26 out of the 32 unis that I spoke with last year do cover travel insurance for students, there was such a discrepancy in terms of the way they handle leisure travel for students. A couple of unis, best practice, cover students for like 50% of the trip can be leisure travel. But there were some institutions that had really confusing policies, like if you were traveling more than 50 kilometres away from your host destination, you weren't covered. And that can lead to a situation, of course, where students don't know what they're covered for and they end up not being covered at all. And you know what? These are the guys we're here for, right? We're here to look after these kind of students, and we need to make sure that it's really clear for them. Outside of that, travel insurance also has some other things. The processes are mind-bogglingly like manual, blow your brains out, boring. That's no good. We need to make sure that's getting done better. And finally, the process for students to extend insurance once they're overseas is really cumbersome and difficult for most institutions. Processes are really unclear, which means it's unclear for students, and that puts us at risk. Okay, gap number two, and this is the number one thing that actually sends me crazy when I think about student mobility in Australian institutions, and we're talking about systems. Most institutions, over half Australian institutions, are still working on spreadsheets to handle some or all of their mobility processes. About a quarter of institutions do have some sort of formal system in place now, some commercial solution to handle their mobility programs, and that's definitely a step up. Because the massive risk for institutions is data entry errors if you're just working on spreadsheets. It's things like, you know, these manually following up all the stuff that needs to be following up. So many moving parts, something is always going to get missed. Let's think about student travel details, just the process of capturing those travel details from students and keeping those updated. Now, until now, there haven't been any solutions that have been custom built for the Australian environment. We've actually just taken care of that as a solution. And for the Global Society, for example, we've actually completely automated the collection of students' travelling details and the process of asking them to update those with us right through until when they depart. So it is possible, but it just requires some commitment. Number two, big gap, systems. Oh, hi, I didn't see you there. Let's talk about gap number three. Now, gap number three is about actually capturing students' travel details, and you folks know how hard this is because it's such a manual process, but it's absolutely essential because when the shit hits the fan and a critical incident happens overseas, you know what happens? Management are suddenly on our backs wanting to know exactly where our students are. But because it's such a manual process, those institutions that have good systems in place are already winning. On top of that, you've also got the companies that manage risk as their core business. I'm talking about International SOS and a couple of the others here. And there's about half the Australian universities work with professional risk and travel managers, and those guys are in the best possible situation. Now, as we've said, one of the big difficulties is getting students to submit their details. How do we handle that? Well, the unis that do this best do things like don't give them any money, don't give them their scholarships or their OS help until they submit their travel details to you. What else do students need before they go? Well, things like Centrelink letters and other key documents that they absolutely need to get their administration done. Don't provide it to them until they've actually given you their travel details and updated them. That's the way to take care of it. I can't believe she's having morning sickness, the poor thing. Oh, Let's talk about pre-departure, gap number 4. So, the biggest issue when it comes to pre-departure, most institutions are doing it, some institutions are doing it very well. But the first thing that's a real challenge is making sure that all students have access to it, because we've got all of these different types of programs now. It's not just semester exchange, we have short-term programs, students going on third-party provider programs, internships, NCP, there's a million of them. Institutions are really struggling with this area about how to make pre-departure available to everybody. And of course that's a huge issue, right? Because things like contraception and not getting pregnant when you're overseas can be really important to share with students who you cannot assume know everything. So how do we make sure that every student gets pre-departure information? Well, the best institutions are doing things like putting information online, on demand, writing guides. I'll have a bit of a brag and say working with the Global Society as well. And also they make compulsory pre-departure actually compulsory. So one of the big things that this best practice project found was that a lot of institutions say that coming to pre-departure is compulsory, but actually have no mechanisms to make sure that students are actually digesting that information. So there's a lot of things going on here. Having pre-departure that's consistent across all program types and that is comprehensive. And then secondly, having a system in place that actually can handle that heavy lifting of following up with students when they don't attend. That's what institutions need. Not easy, but definitely necessary. So let's talk about gap number 5, and that's outbound mobility specific critical incident plans. What I found actually enormously surprising was that half of the Australian universities that I spoke with didn't have a critical incident response plan that specifically addressed outbound mobility. And even more surprising than that, I suppose, is that 1/4 didn't have any kind of critical incident plan whatsoever. Now, obviously, when the shit hits the fan, you need to know what you're doing, and those critical incident plans are absolutely essential. One enormously awesome piece of best practice is from Edith Cowan University, who have the Risk Assurance Service Centre. And that centre of the university is focused on educating and training people around the institutions about risk, rather than just saying no. And that's what we all need, better education and better training around risk. But it all starts with a great critical incident plan. Gap number 6, we're talking about staff training, and staff training is a big gap. Think about all those study tours that head out from Australia overseas, and how many academics who might be incredible academics have never looked after a group before, or who have limited experience with student pastoral care. It's a huge gap. Deakin University, absolute best practice, making sure that every single academic heading out has got that sort of staff training. But going forward, if we really want to limit our risk and make sure our students are well prepared and our health and safety is taken care of, we do need to make sure that staff training is done a lot better. Oh, really? Gap number 7, responding to incidents when things go bad overseas, when the shit really hits the fan. We need to know where our students are first and foremost, but that's really hard to do when you don't have a good system and process in place. The other thing that's a major gap in terms of responding to incidents is the whole thing around how staff's capability to respond to those incidents. Imagine if your entire group in the middle of Peru, far from anywhere, ends up with diarrhea, and you have an academic that's never taken a student group away before. How are they going to respond to that? How we respond to incidents starts with preparation and good systems and processes, and we do need to do that better. Gap number 8 is perhaps the most serious and significant of the entire project, and it relates to pre-departure for non-exchange students and students going on short-term programs. And as we've already discussed, basically this is almost non-existent in most institutions, and that's creating this enormous disparity between students going on exchange and students going on all types of other experiences. And of course, it's totally understandable. Most institutions don't have dedicated staff looking after short-term and non-exchange mobility programs like internships, where there is so much risk and there's so much work that needs to be done to actually keep track of all of these students. Uni of Wollongong, I love you guys. You're doing some of the best work out there. Uni of Wollongong has got an online Moodle course that non-exchange students have to enrol in, which actually takes them through pre-departure. It's best practice. And that's what we all need to be doing, making sure students on all types of programs are having some sort of pre-departure experience. Arriba. All right, Gap number 9. And this is when students are actually overseas and how we stay in touch with them while they're actually abroad. Because most institutions, you know, we're so pushed for numbers. Everything's about getting that next lot of students ready and helping them go overseas. So the focus on students when they're actually abroad is very minimal. And that's a bit of a gap because we can do a much better job of actually staying in touch with our students whilst they're away. Firstly, awesome in terms of getting more testimonials and stuff like that, but also just checking in and making sure that they're okay. Okay folks, we're at the end, gap number 10, and you're going to be able to read about all of these in a copy of the exec summary of the best practice guide that you'll get sent. Gap number 10 is about when students get home, and we're talking here about re-entry programs as well as the capturing of testimonials. Most institutions actually do absolutely nothing in this space, and even things like capturing testimonials is done very sporadically. And that's a big problem, isn't it? Because if we're not capturing students' experiences, firstly, we can't improve those experiences, and secondly, we don't have the material that we need in order to actually be able to effectively promote to future students. So it's a huge area that needs attention going forward in the future. That's it folks, that's a summary of the best practice guide from last year. You're going to get a copy of it. I hope you have a really great session, and I'm going to be seeing you in a couple of hours when I get off the plane from Los Angeles. I look forward to joining you then, probably with about 3 of these in my hand coming off the red eye. So have a great session, see you later.